Episode 186, an interview with Catherine Lockley. This is the World Organic News for the week ending 16th of September 2019. John Moore reporting. Decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. So this is the audio from the video that was on our conference last week. This is Catherine Lockley, Community Nutritionist. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. In this session, I'm talking to Catherine Lockley. She's a postgraduate nutrition researcher at the ANU, that's the Australian National University, a community nutritionist, a nutrition science communicator through her site Scrumptious Science. She's also a passionate gastronome, food gardener and cook. I'm sure you'll get a lot out of what we had to talk about. Hello, Catherine, and welcome.
Hello, John. Thank you very much for having me around.
It's a pleasure. So I guess we should start with why food and food production are such important considerations in our current climate.
I think that the thing with that particular question is that it's, like most things in this area, multi-stranded, and there's plenty of places to go. So one of the biggest things that will strike everybody, I suspect, who's listening, is that we have an ever-increasing population and ever-dwindling food production resources to keep pace with our ever-increasing population. So that itself, even without figuring in climate change, is a large problem. If you figure in climate change as well, it becomes an extremely large problem. And of course, intrinsic to all that is that there is a lot of food security, insecurity, and lack of equality in people's access to food around the globe. The West wastes an enormous amount of food, particularly food that we have imported from underdeveloped countries. So literally fat-rich people taking the food out of poor people's mouths. And then we've got this terrible health crisis. So from my point of view as a nutritionist, the incidence of diet-related non-communicable diseases like type 2 diabetes and what have you are increasing exponentially and show absolutely no sign of slowing down. In my town alone, we've got double the rate of the state's non-communicable disease hospitalisations and deaths. Mm-hmm. So in my town, literally, we just have heart attacks and diabetes, and it's killing people left, right and centre. And this all comes down to your dietary choices. Then where we go? Look, industrial farming and monocultures, which I think most people who are watching anything about Earth generation will understand are terrible for genetic biodiversity, both flora, fauna, soil microbiome, and they're not sustainable. And I think the scientific community, of which I am part, is absolutely on board with this being a fact. This is not a hypothesis anymore.
It was at this point we had some NBN issues, so we're just going to cut out the bits that didn't work, and we're moving on to Catherine talking about real food.
You know, there's an incredible joy in everything, the entire cycle, not just the picking of the food, which can be fun, and you can do that, you know, with or the sort of pick your own places. You know, you get the family in the car and pop out and pick your own. You get some of that idea of how wonderful food can be when it's fresh and you can hold it in your hands and you can see it on the tree. But if you're involved in the whole cycle, so you know, you're making your soil into a beautiful condition, you're getting you back into it, and your little bits of you are breaking off into the soil as you injure yourself, little bits of it are breaking off into you, and you're really nurturing a plot to, you know, its maximum fertility. Then you're planting some seed that you've either gotten from, you know, a friend or this incredible gentleman that grows this incredible garden down the road and you've always been jealous of it, or maybe you were just perusing a seed catalogue all the way through winter like me and dreaming of what you can plant in spring. But, you know, and then there's the wait for the seedling and the hunt for the critters to stop the seedling getting destroyed, and you know, watching that mature and blossom and do its thing, and then, you know, praying that there's a bee, and there is a bee. You get so excited by the bee, it's kind of ridiculous. And then finally, at the end of summer, you are rewarded with, you know, possibly a nice, strange, novelty, beautiful pumpkin. And honestly, the way that you eat that pumpkin and the way that you cook that pumpkin and the way that you enjoy that pumpkin is a completely different experience to a cling-wrapped half a butternut that you pull in from Coles. One is a commodity and one is something that you've invested yourself, your time, your energy and your passion into, and it changes the entire way that you eat and consume that, including, funnily enough, biochemically in terms of nutrients.
If I could jump in there, that's an interesting point. Yeah, you're talking about monoculture and commodities. Now, from what I can see, and I'd like your opinion on this, it's the commoditisation of farming and dairying's like the canary in the coal mine with the dollar a litre milk. A commodity is always going to go down in price in the long run because of economies of scale.
Absolutely.
But with a commodity, you lose that flavour, and it's the price imperatives there are transport rather than flavour. Does that make... Would that try?
That's it. Well, that's exactly it. Transport, shelf life, appearance. No one ever did a study into what people prefer as an appearance for, say, let's stick with them. No one ever did a nationwide study or even a reasonable sample size of what kind of pumpkin people are. Somebody literally just decided that we like Kents and Japs and butternuts, and that's what we do. And it's kind of insane because when people, are taken away from the monoculture and there's diversity in the heirloom world, for instance, they're like kids at a candy shop. I'm sure you've seen it yourself, John. Like when there's a farmer's market or a roadside stall with strange, knobbly pumpkins and weird, hooky-looking things, and people and money is never an option. They just, I've got to have that. I want to see what that's all about. And they're excited again all of a sudden, by colours and textures they've never seen. And it's, that makes me extremely happy with us.
And now we're moving on to talk about the food system with Catherine.
And the more you know about the food industry, the less you wish you knew, quite frankly. Yeah. It's not all evil. I mean, it really isn't completely evil, but it is financially motivated, and unfortunately when that becomes the height of everything else falls away.
I don't even think it's meant as evil. It's just driven by shareholder value, and when that happens, everything else falls away, and that's why we need to do it ourselves, I think. That's
right. And the rhetoric and the narrative can be justified depending on your angle and on your point of view. And there's a lot of very clever rhetoric and narrative from people who perhaps have a different take on it from, say, for instance, gardeners, farmers, gastronomes, even, rhetorics of public health and public good and, access to food for all and health and microbial safety and why cold storage is an excellent thing. And, of course, in many ways it is. It has increased food availability and it has stopped an awful lot of waste and it has enabled us to store for long periods very, very safely and to reduce potentially fatal microbial loads. But it comes with a nice big cost on the other side as well.
Yeah, well, there's always a trade-off here. And because you're talking about the monocultures, there used to be food waste, but it wasn't wasted because it was fed to pigs. But because
livestock,
kept in such tight conditions, if there's anything dodgy, they'll just get destroyed by the disease. So now that food that used to go into animal feed doesn't. I can remember loads of day-old bread as a kid going off to the piggeries.
Yeah, and these days, of course, you can, like most of us that do any sort of growing, you don't waste any of your food, particularly if you've grown it yourself because it's sacred, because that stuff is, even if you can't get through it eating-wise, there's no way you're putting that in the garbage bin. So it goes into the compost or it goes to the chickens, and that's an appropriate use. Turn it back into the soil or turn it back into soil via the bum of a chicken, either way. But, that's an appropriate use of your gorgeously looked after produce. No way would it go into a landfill. Never.
Another NBN disturbance. Well, like that here with raspberries.
Yes.
15.
We've got the raspberries too.
Close my eyes at night.
Yeah, and they're lovely and we all love them.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you do get to the point where it's like, I've preserved the everythings and I've made raspberry everything. And if I see another raspberry, I'm literally going to scream. But, this is, we're laughing, but this is how abundant it is.
Yep.
And it's not $7.50 a punnet. It's you can barely give them away in season because the abundance is so massive. And yet we're sort of fed this, this narrative that a berry is very rare and precious and something that needs to be charged an enormous amount of money for. The only reason for that is because of their bad storage and shelf life, and they're delicate, so they don't transport well.
And
so you're paying for transport.
Yeah.
And they're seasonal, but you're paying for transport and you're paying for individual pickers. Plant a couple of bushes in your yard and you won't bet, the supply will exceed the demand so quickly.
But the thing is, there's always the next fruit. So as our raspberries were finishing, the blackberries came in.
Exactly.
So, there's always something if you plan it right.
Yeah, this is, and I once gave a talk, I think it was to a Lions Club or a Rotary, and I was talking about my favourite fruit in the world is an apple. I'm a huge apple fan. Crazy apple lady. I want my ashes under an apple tree, all sorts of stuff like this. But, when you wait for an apple until early autumn, it's an extraordinary thing. But the crispness and the acidity and the freshness and the juice and just, even an apple tree itself is one of the prettiest things in the world, heavily laden with these beautiful red globes and, you add a few spider webs and a bit of moss, and the mists of autumn, and it's just the most divine experience just looking at it. And then you've got these beautiful things that are really screaming, eat me. You understand Eve all of a sudden. I totally now get you. Yep, I wouldn't resist that either. And it's just, you've waited all year. Literally, and you've been praying over that tree, even if you're not religious. You get this, tiny little grape-sized ball, and you cannot believe that's going to turn into an apple. And, all summer you're guarding it like this crazy apple shepherd, making sure that there's no codlin moth and there's, no bird attacks. And you're doing every human intervention you can, but they're like jewels. And so when you finally bite one, this is not something you picked up from Coles, chucked in a bag and put in the kids' lunches. It's precious. It's really precious, and you eat it accordingly.
And now we move on to the benefits of backyard food growing. Apart from the reverence for the food, are there any other benefits you'd like to mention about backyard food gardening?
Look, for starters, I've got to say it's incredibly pleasurable, and I'll give the addendum to that being that I have a lot of friends and a lot of acquaintances that have basically said, look, I'm a brown thumb. I kill everyone. It's all very well for you, Miss Gardening person, but I can't do it. I've tried and I can't do it. And I think they equate hard or a journey or something that needs to be learned like everything else gradually with no thanks, impossible. And like everything worth learning, you're not going to be perfect at the first time. It's not a magical process, although really the sun and the rain and the earth do nearly everything for you. But it's so worth it for so many reasons. So one, and most of the literature is packed and dense with this, is that gardening itself is just such an incredibly good thing for a human being to do on a multitude of levels. So the easiest one probably is physical exercise. Right? You literally cannot have a gorgeous, productive garden without putting some muscle in it. And this could, this might mean pulling grass. Anyone that's ever tried pulling out grass roots will know exactly what I mean. It's hard work and it hurts, right? And the next day you're all sore in strange places that you weren't quite sure even existed anymore. And it gives you a massive muscular workout. You're bending, you're stretching, you're breathing. It's intensely physical, but not in that terrifying, repetitive gymnasium manner. You're actually stretching your directions at once.
Yeah.
Front and centre, and because you're doing something that isn't deliberate exercise, you are actually using most of your major muscle groups without sort of overusing them. Because if you've been pulling up, let's say grassroots again, for an hour, you will stop that activity because it's starting to ache, and you will do something opposite, and you'll actually balance out your own physicality when you're gardening. You say, well, I've got to do something standing now. So I might do some high pruning or something along those lines. And either way, there's quite a natural balance of what the exercise sets are. So, that's your physical health. And, of course, your breathing, you're getting your sunshine, vitamin D, all of these things incredibly important. But gardening and mental health connections, I think, are the ones that I find really, really amazing. And this has been proven again and again, particularly on people with extremely troubled mental health profiles, prisoners, people who have had extraordinarily disadvantaged lives, and all they need to do is be in a garden on a regular basis, and not only does their mentality change, but even their physicality changes. So there's a brilliant study that came out of, I believe it was the Bronx, and again, it was a bunch of prisoners, and they were sent off to do this gardening work for local council. And in their own words, within a couple of weeks, their spines were straighter. They were walking taller. They were proud of what they'd achieved, and they were becoming quite paternal towards the plants that they had planted, that they had fostered. And, what used to be something that you would never imagine that they would care this much, but they really did. And they would be furious, murderously furious if somebody hurt their tree or their... I thought, wouldn't that be, if you could just flip that, how wonderful would it be if we all had that much of a sense of connection and ownership to the plants on this planet, that we were murderously furious if anyone dared to touch what we had spent so long nurturing. And I think it's one of the reasons I want everybody to garden, because I want them to feel that sense of pride and stewardship, like a parent.
Well, before we go on to that, you're talking about the prisoners and the gardening. I read somewhere early research that it's the contact with the soil that alters the human gut biome.
And it is early research.
Yeah. And
I've looked into it a bit myself, yeah.
And it does have mental health benefits as well.
Yeah, it's funny. There are identified microbes in the soil that do have incredible mental health benefits, and I can't for the life of me bring up the name of him at the moment. But equally, and it should be because you can get a little bit too green and crunchy about this, there are also many microbes in the soil that can kill you.
Yes.
Should be mentioned as well. Yes, and it's fairly important to realise that it's all very well to be a crunchy hippie who likes growing veggies in the dirt, guilty, but it's also worth taking some precautions.
And now we talk about culture and Michael Pollan. Michael Pollan talks about that the culture comes down through the mothers, and that's where the food comes from, and so that's what we eat. Yeah, and there's a lot to that. And
Michael Pollan, there is absolutely, and he has my all-time favourite quote. The best diet in the world, the best dietary advice, put down every diet book and just listen to the one sentence. Eat food, not too much, mostly plants. And salmon.
Yeah. Which is easy
really
enough.
That simple.
Which is fairly easy to do if you're growing it yourself. And you don't have to harvest the whole lettuce. You can take the outside leaves and keep the plant growing.
Yeah, and you don't end up with nasty, soggy bags of rotten lettuce in the bottom of your fridge. So you just take as you need. And, the wonderful kales and anything in the brassica family, you take off anything from bottom and the damn thing just keeps going up like a palm tree. And you will have that just for an incredibly long time. Again, like the raspberries, to the point where if you see another piece of kale, you may hit someone. I've made kale scones. I've made kale gnocchi. I've made kale smoothies. I can't eat any more kale. But I think on that note, there is an important thing to be had there, that we're all these days very concerned with our health and our we're very self-focused and very precious about our health and our well-being and our, mental, spiritual, physical, the whole lot, because we've got the luxury to be, basically. Other people are so well off in other countries don't quite have the same focus. But, I would say to people, if you don't like kale, don't eat it. You won't die. And don't grow kale. Like, if you're growing in a vegetable garden and you don't like eating it, don't grow it. unless you've got chickens, maybe the chickens will like it. But don't grow what you want to eat, And people not so very long ago, and I'm sure that John, did I read somewhere that you had Irish heritage?
Yeah.
Well, the good old Irish lived on pretty much potatoes and greens and tiny bits of meat for centuries.
And
they didn't have pawpaws.
Yep.
Yeah, dairy products. They didn't have quinoa. They really didn't have any superfoods per se, and yet they managed to populate countries, run governments, invent art, the whole lot on actually what was an incredibly narrow range, really, compared to what we have today. So don't get obsessed with this. I've got to have this and this superfood and this blah, blah, blah. No, you don't. You don't. You can live your entire life without eating quinoa and you'll be fine. I promise you.
So while we're on that point, can you debunk the phrase superfood?
Superfood is, we got obsessed with nutrients, right? We discovered a few hundred years ago there was such a thing as scurvy. And then we discovered this miraculous compound called vitamin C that combated scurvy. And then the hunt was on for all the miraculous compounds that did various things. And we did. And you know them. They're an alphabet of lots and lots of different vitamins and minerals, what have you. And the plant marketing companies have then gone, right, I've got this thing, I need to make some money. So I'm going to say that this food group has yada, yada, yada amount of vitamins compared to something that might be more pedestrian, like an orange, for instance. So you'll have someone saying an acai berry has, 7 times the vitamin C of an orange. Everyone goes, oh, golly, that sounds like great value. I'd better get me some acai. But did you need 7 times more vitamin C? By the way, it's water soluble. Most of it, you'll pee it out. That's going down the loo. Because you didn't need 7 times that vitamin C. And it's all gone. It's like taking vitamin pills.
Yeah.
If you don't need it, you won't absorb it. And, of course, a lot of the superfood is completely made up, absolutely. So, for instance, your goji berries and your acai berries and all the rest of it, what they don't mention is that exactly the same nutrient profile will exist in something that's quite common and pedestrian to you. Particularly, they play with amounts and weights to make it sound more impressive than it actually is. Broccoli, still amazingly good for you. Blueberries, still amazingly good for you. You know what superfood is? Food. Whatever keeps you alive. It's super.
Yeah.
Go the food.
It's better than the alternative.
It's a marketing term, and anything that's marketed too well, be seriously suspicious. If it comes from the Amazon, it's also not sustainable.
Now we move from superfoods to eating seasonally.
Eating seasonally and eating locally is another big, huge belief of mine, and it's not just a belief. This is backed by science into sustainability. If you don't live in a tropical environment, you're very lucky, and I'm very lucky. I love pineapple. I can't grow it here. So I'm lucky at the moment that I do occasionally allow myself some pineapple. But, realistically, I could actually live my entire life without ever touching a tropical fruit, and I'm not going to die of malnutrition. I'm really not. The only thing that will be affected is my desire for variety and flavour, which, at the end of the day, I live in a cold climate. The fruits that I can get in a cold climate are perfectly adequate. Perfect and delicious, for that matter. I happen to love them.
Yeah. I suspect that the food that we grow in the climate we live in provides us what we need to live in that environment.
Yeah, and that's a hypothesis that I lean towards myself. I don't know how much evidence there is sort of specifically for it in a reductionist empirical frame, but I do tend to believe that where you are will have an abundance of the nutrients that you require if you know where to.
Corn, rice, wheat, potato. Are basically feeding 60% of the world diet or something?
Yeah, which is insane because obviously they're not.
And there's very little variation within each of those genetically. And
less as time goes on, because we're letting the heirloom varieties disappear in favour of, again, storage, shelf life, sweetness, appearance. We lost most of the flint corns are gone. They're only grown in the Americas. And they're the most extraordinary nutrition profile in those things. Like, they're, incredibly good for you. But we've lost the ability to grow them. We've lost the seed. We've lost the ability to cook. We don't know how to cook them. And it's, again, we've lost an incredible source of nutrition there, but which is why very big on seed saving and very big on making sure that genetic library of the heirloom varietals is maintained and spread, like guerrilla warfare kind of spread, because the only way that we're going to manage to keep any kind of genetic diversity in our foods is by seed saving and swapping, growing crops that are good in our local environments and making sure that we continue to get those shared around.
Some great knowledge there from Catherine, and you can follow her over at Scrumptious Science. And that brings this week's episode to a conclusion. We'll see you all next week.